Well, we started realism in the Enlightenment, and realism kind of breaks off, and it continues, and then there's Romanticism and realism kind of working together. Most of the 19th century, what do we call most of the 19th century? The Victorian age, named after the English Queen Victoria. So, after Romanticism, the Victorian age, and again, the realistic novel will be one of the most valued art forms. And who are our great novelists of the Victorian age? Charles Dickens.
Jules Verne. Very French.
And what does he like to write about, Charles Dickens? Orphans. Because if Pamela had one dead parent, then having two dead parents must be even better. That must be even more exciting. So he writes about orphans in London. And what do these orphans have to do to survive? Work in industrial London. And therefore the city is often depicted as a machine. It's a machine that breathes smoke and has oil for blood, and uses poor people and children as tiny parts of the machine, tiny cogs in the machine. Late Victorian authors we will call these the Victorian modernizers. Will be who in America? Who are the American novelists? Mark Twain. And Henry James. And what kind of education does Mark Twain have?
Self-education.
Self-educated. He is an autodidact. Didact means to teach. Auto means self. He is self-taught. He reads and reads and reads as he is employed as a sailor on the Mississippi River. And he's someone whose subject is America. He's you might say, a regionalist. That is, he wants to write realistically about real places. And his project is to record American vernacular. That is the American dialect. English as it's really spoken by real people. And when you read Huckleberry Finn, as I'm sure you will, it's pretty difficult. It's difficult sometimes even for me, because you are struggling with the black slave dialect as well as many different variations of the poor white dialect. He wants to map the American vernacular, English as it is spoken. Huckleberry Finn is wild. And many people in the book are trying to civilize him. Is civilization good? No. Nope. Civilization's bad. This is how Huck Finn spells civilized. Of course, it's really spelled with a C. Right? Huck Finn is only learning how to read, but for Twain, it is the wild part of Huckleberry Finn, the natural part of Huckleberry Finn, that is good. It's civilization that is corrupt. It's civilization that is bad. How about Henry James? What kind of education does he have? Did we talk about Henry James's education?
Like high level education?
Certainly a very high level of education.
Maybe university?
Certainly went to not one university, but many universities, and went to universities in Europe.
And know many languages.
Knows many languages. He has been to France and Italy and England and seen the best universities and the best museums. Let's say he has a cosmopolitan education. What's it mean, cosmopolitan? Who reads Cosmopolitan magazine? Elena, do you read Cosmopolitan magazine? No? Why is Cosmopolitan magazine called Cosmopolitan magazine?
It's from all around the world.
What is Cosmopolitan magazine about? Fashion. Its subject matter is fashion. And where is fashion the most important? Which cities? Paris, New York, Milan. Paris, New York, Milan, the big three of fashion. And why do many people read a fashion magazine called Cosmopolitan? Because we don't live in Paris. We don't live in Milan, we live in the village. Have you ever been to Paris? Ever been to Milan? Ever been to a place where people are wearing very fashionable clothes? Maybe just Prague. Fuzzy boots. Everybody's wearing fuzzy boots, and no one's wearing fuzzy boots at home. And then about a year later, the fuzzy boots come to Pilsen. Cosmopolitan magazine makes you a citizen of the world. You can see the most fashionable clothes from Paris, Milan, and New York immediately. You don't have to wait. So, Politan, it means something like what?
Like a citizen?
Yeah, citizen.
From Greece.
It's from the Greek. Citizen and cosmos. The universe, the world. If you're a cosmopolitan, you're a citizen of the world. Henry James is very different than Mark Twain in that he feels a certain anxiety about not being European. America doesn't have any history. America doesn't have any culture to speak of. We're just a bunch of poor Hutt Finns running around in the wilderness. If you want to be part of the evolution of culture, the evolution of history, Americans have to look to Europe, and Henry James does, and in fact spends at least half of his life in England. Moves to Europe. Like the great tradition of the novel, like Pamela, we will call him a psychological realist. And in fact, his entire family is interested in psychology. His brother is the great psychologist William James, who would be the greatest psychologist in history if it were not for Sigmund Freud. Henry James is interested in the way people think, the interior life, what's going on inside, and he's also interested in writing about more upper-class characters. Mark Twain is interested mostly in lower-class characters. Henry James wants to write about class, and particularly the American inability to really understand the European class system. So, you will most likely read Daisy Miller, one of his short novels, for the state exam, and essentially it's about a young American girl, again, female hero, a young American girl whose reputation is damaged, whose life is damaged because she doesn't understand the formal European class system, the customs and habits of Europeans. She is made something of a victim by her trip to Europe.
Is it not like a criticism of the class system? Because you can feel sorry or pity for Daisy Miller.
I certainly think you are supposed to feel sorry for Daisy Miller.
So therefore you can say that the system, the class system harmed her, ergo the class system is bad. So is it like criticism?
I certainly think there is criticism of the class system. Class system is one of the things that hold people down. Good manners, bad manners. One of the whole points of manners is to find out who the aristocrats are and who the aristocrats are not. Manners separate us. Have you ever been to eat at like a fancy restaurant and didn't know how to use like the utensils? Like, what is this fork? Why do I have 3 forks? Why do I need 3 forks? Well, if you're an aristocrat, you know why you need 3 forks. Why is this fork cold? Why do I need a cold fork? Why is the spoon warm? The mysteries of the class system, the mysteries of etiquette. And frequently, manners, we have the idea that manners is to be polite and respectful, but frequently manners are to mark out people who are not aristocrats. these the Victorian modernizers. There's a heavy sense of irony with both authors. So our next period of time will be after the death of Victoria, the turn of the century, 1901 to say something like 1960. And what do you think this period of time in our culture will be called? Martina, what will we call this period of time? The age of innovations? That is certainly true. There are many, many, many innovations during this period of time. Remember back in the old medieval days when you were born into a world where there was very little technological process, or very little technological change, and the world looked almost exactly the same? The day you were born as the day you died. So if these guys are the Victorian modernizers and we just did the Victorian age, then what is this? So we just did the Victorian age. So it's the modern age. Excellent. Modernism. And what does it mean? Modernism. Or to be modern.
Like to differ from what was before?
Well, certainly the idea of modern is to be up to date. Now, of today, Martina said, what? Many technological inventions, right? This is the age that sees a huge number of technological inventions in a very sudden and quick period of time. Remember the Enlightenment? Promises of the Enlightenment? We were going to be reasonable and rational, and there was going to be science. We would use science to explain things instead of mysteries and superstitions. And we were going to become better people. We were all going to be little Benjamin Franklins, each one of us marking our mistakes and correcting them. And we were going to be better people, and we were going to have better governments, a better world, perhaps even a perfect world, perhaps some kind of utopia. And here we are in the modern age, and we've got all this new stuff. What kind of new stuff do we have?
TV.
Not TV just yet.
Radio.
Well, we got radios. Let's say 1901 to about 1914.
Cinema.
Film, cinema, get some film. And somebody said, look, we got some radio. Been working on the radio for a while. What else?
Tram, maybe? A lot of electricity everywhere, light bulb.
We get, yeah, basically electricity, which we've kind of harnessed in the very, very late 19th century. We start to have electric applications in cities. Things like, you know...
Street lamps.
Yeah. Telephones. Street lamps. Electric lights, I guess. What else? Cars. That's a really big one. cars, and so that revolutionizes transport. And there's another revolutionary transport.
Huge ships, like Titanic.
We've had those, well, like Titanic, that's in the 20s, but...
Aircrafts?
Yeah, airplanes. Why did I write to 1914? What happens in 1914?
Oh, Franz Ferdinand was shot in Sarajevo.
Hmm?
Well, the First World War.
Right.
No, střelili Ferdinanda.
Prvního. Jenom se to trochu plánuje.
Now we have cars. That looks really useful. I wonder how I could kill people with them. And so cars almost immediately turn into tanks. Wow, an airplane! Finally, mankind's greatest dream, to be able to escape gravity, to fly, the freedom of birds. I wonder how I can use this invention to kill people. And how do we kill people with airplanes?
We have to mount guns.
Yep. Which brings us to another handy new invention. The machine gun. God, can you imagine how long it would take me to kill all of you if I only had a pistol? I mean, that would take at least a minute for me to shoot all of you with a pistol.
And reload.
It'd be so much easier to just mow you all down with a machine gun. So we can now put machine guns on our cars and armor on our cars and call them tanks. And we can put machine guns on our airplanes. And what else? How else can I kill people with an airplane? Bombs. And there are two different kinds of bombs. There's like dynamite bombs that go boom. And we also have gas bombs. We invent biological warfare. We invent these gases like mustard gas, where if you breathe it in, you actually cough up your internal organs. Wow, aren't we lucky to have cars and airplanes and movies and telephones? Modernism might be defined, one way we could possibly define it, as a lack of faith in either the institutions of religion or science to save us. Certainly the Enlightenment promise that reason would be our savior is certainly ended by World War II, and a very great pessimism settles over European culture after World War I, and that pessimism is only reinforced by World War II, which ends with the most depressing invention of all. What do we get in 1945? Yeah. Atom bomb. So now we are so smart we can destroy the entire planet. at one time.
Wow.
So, the generation of writers that, especially in this World War I period, I would say from about 1914 to 1920, is where many of the most important works of modernism. Excuse me? Did you say something? Dadaism. What is Dadaism?
It's about nonsenses.
Yep. It's about nonsense.
That's pretty much something.
French.
This is just one of the many different modernist movements that occur. Why is it called Dadaism?
Well, because the founder was Tristan Tzara, or what was his name? Founded Dadaism like nonsense, and isn't it some sound of a duck?
There is a manifesto for Dadaism, and it's about nonsense, right? If we now doubt the Enlightenment promise of reason, we can only swing the other way into a kind of nonsense, or at least for the Dadaists. Dada is like baby talk, crazy talk, da da da, blah blah blah. Blah blah blah, da da da.
The sound of
It
the
was
duck.
found in the French dictionary.
Here, sorry.
It's in the French dictionary. Yeah, it's a French movement, right? Why is a lot of modernism very important in Paris? Dadaist writers would use cut-up style. That is, they would go through books and magazines and cut out words and shake up all the words that they had cut out, put them on a table, and try to arrange stories at random out of the cut-up words. Again, eliminate the rationality from the writing. This is only one of the many, many, many different artistic movements that arise out of modernism. It's very difficult to talk about modernist writers as a group because they are so individualistic, because they don't believe in institutions anymore. They don't believe in a universal religion like Christianity. We don't have a communal sense of what's right and wrong anymore. Why do we really, really begin to doubt religion after World War I?
Well, because God's intention cannot be killing millions of people.
And we all killed the millions of people for the same reason. The Germans were fighting for God and country. The French were fighting for God and country. It was the same God.
And everybody saw it in television or in cinemas.
Not television. Television won't really be invented until about the 50s. But yeah, you can see films of all of the young men of Europe killing each other, and they did it in the name of patriotism and God. The same reason that the Axis powers and the Allied powers killed each other was in the name of religion. And certainly the science that allowed us to kill so efficiently so brutally, that's not going to save us. If religion and science are not going to save us, who is going to save us? Well, the modernists would say, you have to save yourself. Art. Art is what's going to save us. And every one of you has to be an artist. Your life has to be art. You have to live your life in a way that brings some sense of dignity and beauty and artistic redemption to the way you live. Because you can't count on the collective projects of religion or science to do that for you. So, the Dadaists are mostly French, and so we are studying English, so there are no very important English Dadaists, though the English authors, the American authors, are well aware of such a movement. Let's list out our important modernists working in the English language. Who are some English modernists? If you have your guide to your state exam, to the authors on the state exam, why don't you look at that?
Well, Hemingway? Ernest Hemingway?
Ernest Hemingway is certainly one of them. And in fact, Ernest Hemingway is actually a veteran of World War I. Any others?
Well, maybe A.C. Doyle? Arthur Conan Doyle?
He's a Victorian.
Oh.
James Joyce.
James Joyce. Oh.
Fitzgerald.
F. Scott Fitzgerald.
Joseph Heller.
He's not on your list, but you're certainly right. Joseph Heller is a veteran of World War II, and he would be considered a major modernist. He would be considered an absurdist. He thinks the world is an absurd place. Again, anti-enlightenment, anti-reason, depicts the world as an absurd place. What's Joseph Heller's most famous book? Catch-22, which is kind of a way of saying, damned if you do, damned if you don't. If you're in a catch-22 situation, do you know what catch-22 stands for?
Well, Catch-22 was in rules for flight pilots, and there was some phrase that if you are crazy, you cannot fly the missions.
Right.
But you cannot say that I'm crazy, don't let me fly the missions, because movement.
That would prove you are rational. Nobody wants to fight in a war. Only a crazy person would want to fight in a war. So if you say, I don't want to fight, you're not insane. Only insane people want to fight. Only insane people can get out of the army. Catch-22. But let's try to move back to World War I for a little bit. Can you think of any other of these modernists? Have your list.
Steiner.
World War II. But you know a lot of American authors on your list of authors. Do you have your list with you? Who are some of the other authors that are part of this period? See William Faulkner on there?
Yep, no. Perfect.
TV show.
Who are some of the poets? See any poets on that list? T.S. Eliot, Ezra Pound,
Nana Volsa.
W.B. Yeats, Stevens, and again, each one of these authors has a highly individualistic style. We can kind of break them into groups. For instance, both Ernest Hemingway and Scott Fitzgerald are, well, Ernest Hemingway is actually a World War I veteran. Scott Fitzgerald is in the Army. He does not see any fighting. But both of them are very disillusioned. They both go to Paris. And really, Paris is filled with these World War I veterans, these young men who are suffering from something like post-traumatic stress disorder. Right? They are suffering from an extreme sense of anxiety. And they are, as we say in America, self-medicating with a lot of alcohol. They see very little hope for the future. And we often call these people the lost generation. James Joyce, William Faulkner, they're very interested in the workings of the human mind, kind of like Henry James. They are interested in psychology. They are very influenced by the work of Sigmund Freud, the idea that we have a subconscious, we have a dream life that is as real as our exterior life. And they want to record the human mind as it works. And so they both use a prose style that we now call stream of what? Where's what's that? Consciousness. Mm-hmm. Stream of consciousness. Remember, Mark Twain said that Huckleberry Finn was a kid with a good heart and a deformed conscience. That's the little voice that tells you right from wrong. And this is consciousness, which means awake, aware, sensible. How does your mind process sensations, observations? What is the thought process when you are awake? Stream of consciousness. They're poets. And they are interested in myth, a kind of mytho-poetic construction, and they want to place modern people in a historical, mythic context. But these myths are fragmented and broken and all kind of shuffled up because culture for T.S. Eliot is a wasteland. You're going to read The Wasteland, and it's going to be filled with fragments and pieces of Shakespeare and Chaucer and the Bible and even poets like Virgil. And they're all mixed up together in a kind of garbage can because culture has failed. Ezra Pound will have a very, very similar method, except for him it's not a garbage can, it's a whirlpool. All of these myths, all of these sustaining pieces of literature that were supposed to bring us together, supposed to give us a common culture so we can communicate, have all been destroyed by this modernist pessimism brought about by the wars. Yeats is also interested in myths, both Greek and Roman, and he's Irish, so he writes a lot about Irish myths as well. Wallace Stevens is a poet, but he's very different. Who's the most famous painter of the modernist era? Picasso. That is, painters who work in the style of the abstract. He is an abstract poet. He admires painters probably as much or more than any writers who come before him. He will not write about myths and traditions so much. He will write in a kind of abstraction. Very difficult to make sense of, just in the way it's kind of difficult to understand a painting by Picasso or Braque or Kandinsky. And in fact, we're much more used today to looking at modernist art. Like, we kind of understand modernist art now, right? Because you're used to seeing visual depictions of these works of art in your media and films and television. But very few of us actually read poetry anymore. Remember, this is the old aristocratic discourse. Most people don't really read poetry anymore. It's only for a kind of aristocratic elite. And so, these poets in particular will be very challenging for you. Challenging in the way that a Cubist painting or work of modernist art is challenging. These works are also very challenging because they're kind of lost in the subconscious. Hemingway and Fitzgerald will be easier for you because they are operating in a very traditional, realist, novelistic style. You'll be used to reading these kinds of stories. Okay, that's where I'm going to end our lecture and the information that you need for the test. Do you have any questions about the test?
Will it be hard?
Not if you're brilliant.
Oh.
So you want to know key concepts, You want to know key illustrations from the key writers, right? You want to understand how we are determined by our bodies in Chaucer, the creation of character, realistic characters in the Renaissance, how we all want to be perfect little Ben Franklins in the Enlightenment. The struggle of the unprotected and uncared for, the orphans in the Victorian period. What's happening to the hero throughout the history of literary evolution?
He changed a lot.
How has it changed? Where does it start? With Beowulf. What kind of hero is Beowulf?
Like
Godlike.
Godlike, supernatural-like. And then we move to the medieval period. What is the hero like? He's certainly an aristocrat. He's going to be a knight or a king. And he's going to be some kind of Superman figure. The smartest, the bravest, the strongest.
And he can solve all the mysteries or problems.
He can solve all of our problems, and he's an example for us. We can never live up to his example. But he's somebody for us to look up to. And how about in the Renaissance? What will our hero be like in the Renaissance?
Oh, still aristocrat,
Still an aristocrat?
but with a little flaws.
Sometimes even big flaws. Flaws like, what is Hamlet's flaw?
procrastination.
Procrastination. If you've learned one thing in this class, I'm sure you know that Hamlet his tragic flaw is procrastination. And then in the Enlightenment, we get a new form of literature. And what's that new form of literature?
Sonnet?
The novel. The new.
Okay.
And what will our hero be like with the novel? No, Tomasz, I think you know.
I think I'm Lukáš.
Lukáš, pardon.
It's like you or me.
Like you or me, a middle class hero with flaws, hoping for a better future. And then by the time we get to the Victorians, what is the hero like?
Poor little orphan.
Poor little orphans, and if you're Huck Finn, you barely can read. Right? Pamela can read quite well. She writes these many, many, many letters. Right? The whole book is an epistolary novel filled with her beautiful letters to her father. By the time we get to Dickens and to Twain, the poor little hero may not even be able to read.
The heroes are becoming worse and worse.
They're becoming lower and lower class. Though in the case of somebody like Huckleberry Finn, he has a wonderful heart. He's a good person. Any more questions?
How many questions will be there?
I think about 20 to 25, I would say. 20 to 25 questions.
And will it be like ABC or you don't have to?
There will be a mix. There will be some true false. There will be some ABC. There will be some definitions. Some short answer. And there's even one that asks you to write a short paragraph. You will need to be able to explain to me key concepts like negative capability and the great chain of being and subjectivity versus objectivity. Scary.
Of author? Like from author's view, subjectivity, objectivity?
Well, we talked about subjectivity particularly with the Romantic poets. Right? That they wanted to write against Enlightenment objectivity in science and create an inner world where your inner feelings were as important as
Reality.
exterior facts. Nelly, you look very excited. You're kind of sleepy. Sad. You know, not sleepy. A little depressed, maybe. Sad? No. Any more questions?
When the papers will be corrected? In 14 days?
Yeah, probably. My greatest wish is to have both the papers and the test corrected in 14 days, be able to give them back to you and sign your index in 2 weeks. That is my greatest wish.
But in 2 weeks, it's Christmas Day.
We still have class here, don't we?
Oh my god. Facebook. Maybe one question. How does the quality of the paper affect our passing on the test?
I'm going to give you a large leeway with the paper, but I hope to have comments for everybody's paper.
Okay.
Did we make an error in our planning? No. I thought we planned out the semester. So, next week we will take a test, and then when will we meet to sign your indexes?
17.
So 2 weeks from now, right? So what's next week?
Next week is 10.
10?
Yeah, then 17.
17th, 2 weeks from now,
We're taking the test.
I will sign your index. Is that right?
Facebook.
Well, of course, me signing the index is based on whether you passed the class or not. So I promise, if you pass the test and write a paper where you try to follow the directions that I gave you, then yes, at that time, then I can promise I will sign your paper based on those conditions. Tomasz? No? No? Okay. I will dismiss class. Feel free to come and talk to me if you have any questions or concerns about the end of the semester. It's been a lovely class. Thank you.